He destroyed her life. Now he's the only one who can fix it. A ruthless billionaire. A broken dancer. A past that neither of them can escape. Years ago, one reckless mistake shattered Lilly Waters' dreams, leaving her in a wheelchair and stealing the future she had worked her entire life for. Now the man responsible, Ryan Mistry, the powerful CEO with a heart of stone, is forced to face the consequences of his actions in the most unimaginable way. But what happens when fate turns the tables? As secrets unravel and old wounds resurface, redemption is no longer just a choice. It's survival, betrayal, power, revenge, a love story born from destruction. Subscribe now and don't miss a single chapter of this gripping, emotional roller coaster that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The rain pounded against the windshield like thousands of tiny bullets, blurring the neon lights of the city in the distance. The roar of the Ferrari's engine cut through the night, a beast unleashed on the empty highway. Ryan Mistry gripped the wheel, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he pressed harder on the gas. Speed thrilled him. More than money, more than power, more than anything else in the world. Beside him, his friend in the passenger seat let out a wild laugh, drunk on the rush of the race. "Faster, man! Show them who owns this city!" Ryan smirked. He didn't need encouragement. The world belonged to him already. The road stretched ahead, slick with rain, streetlights flashing past like fleeting ghosts. He barely noticed the blue sedan in front of him until it was too late. "Shit!" Ryan jerked the wheel to the side. The sedan's driver must have seen him in the rearview mirror. In a panic, they swerved sharply, tires screeching against wet asphalt. For a brief moment, the car spun out of control before slamming into the highway's guardrail. A deafening crash, the sound of metal twisting, glass shattering. Sparks exploded into the air as the car crumpled upon impact, its front end crushed against the barrier. Ryan's foot hovered over the brake pedal. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. His breath caught in his throat. "Keep driving," his friend muttered, suddenly quiet. "You don't stop for shit like this." Ryan hesitated. A second, two, his jaw clenched. Then he floored the accelerator. The Ferrari roared forward, cutting through the rain like a bullet, leaving behind nothing but skid marks and a nightmare someone else would have to wake up from. Back at the crash site, the rain continued to fall, washing away blood that slowly spread across the torn leather seat. Inside the wrecked sedan, a young woman lay motionless, her body limp, her face pale, her dark eyes wide open in shock. Lilly Waters. She would never forget this night, and neither would he. The towering glass walls of Mistry Enterprises reflected the golden hues of the setting sun, standing like a fortress in the heart of the city. The empire belonged to one man, Ryan Mistry, a name that commanded both admiration and fear. He had built his real estate empire from the ground up, turning failing properties into gold mines, crushing competition with ruthless precision. Every deal he made, every contract he signed was a testament to his power. Inside his office, Ryan leaned back in his leather chair, a glass of whiskey in hand. The city stretched before him, its skyline a reflection of his dominance. Success had a taste, rich, intoxicating, absolute. But there was no thrill in it anymore. No rush, no competition. He had already won. "Sir, the deal with Lexington Plaza has been finalized," his assistant informed him, standing stiffly at the door. "Of course it has," Ryan replied lazily, taking a slow sip of his drink. People always fold when the numbers are right. Money was the ultimate weapon, and Ryan wielded it without hesitation. There was no room for emotions, no space for weakness, and in his eyes, weakness was everywhere. In the struggling businesses begging for second chances, in the workers who lacked the ambition to climb higher, and most of all, in the broken and the crippled, who clung to society like dead weight. He had no patience for them. "You know what's pathetic?" he mused, setting his glass down. "People who refuse to fight, those who accept their fate instead of clawing their way out of it." His assistant shifted uncomfortably, but knew better than to respond. Ryan didn't tolerate debates. His beliefs were set in stone. Power was everything, and if you couldn't take control of your own life, you were nothing. Outside, a storm began brewing in the darkening sky. Thunder rumbled in the distance, but Ryan remained unfazed. He had conquered everything he had ever set his sights on, and yet the emptiness remained. Success without struggle, wealth without purpose, a kingdom without an heir. He had won every battle. So why did it feel like he had already lost? The ballroom shimmered under the soft glow of golden chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of expensive champagne and hushed conversations. It was a night of wealth, of influence, a gathering of the city's elite under the guise of philanthropy. Art lined the walls, pieces from up-and-coming artists displayed for auction, their value determined not by talent, but by the egos of the bidders. Ryan Mistry had attended countless events like this before. They were all the same, superficial, predictable. He moved through the crowd effortlessly, shaking hands, exchanging smiles that never reached his eyes. To him, this was nothing more than a business opportunity, a place to reinforce his presence among the powerful. Then he saw her. She sat near the center of the room, surrounded by a small gathering of admirers. But it wasn't her audience that made him take notice. It was her presence. Something about her demanded attention, not in an overbearing way, but through sheer force of will. Long waves of chestnut hair framed a face that was both delicate and sharp, her features carrying an elegance that wasn't fragile but unyielding. And though she sat in a sleek black wheelchair, she did not appear diminished by it. Lilly Waters. Ryan knew the name. Everyone in the room did. Once a rising star in the world of dance, a woman destined for greatness on the Broadway stage, until fate took her legs and shattered that dream. Now she was a celebrated artist, her paintings reflecting the very pain and passion that had once been expressed through movement. She was something different, unexpected, uncompromising, a challenge. His lips curled into the faintest smirk. Ryan never backed down from a challenge. Taking a sip from his glass, he made his way toward her, slow and deliberate. As he approached, she glanced up, her hazel eyes locking onto his. There was no awe, no deference, only sharp observation, as if she had already dissected him in seconds. "Ryan Mistry," she said smoothly, before he could even introduce himself. He arched a brow, amused. "I see my reputation precedes me." Lilly tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Your money does." A few people nearby chuckled, intrigued by her boldness. Ryan let out a low chuckle of his own, but something in him tightened. He was used to admiration, to women who sought his attention with well-rehearsed charm. But Lilly Waters, she didn't care about impressing him, and that made her all the more interesting. "You must be as talented with words as you are with a brush," he mused, setting his glass down. "Tell me, do your paintings judge people as quickly as you do?" Lilly gave him a slow, knowing smile. "No," she replied. "They simply reveal the truth." Something flickered in her eyes, something that made Ryan pause for the briefest moment. He had come here expecting to be entertained, to play a game where he always had the upper hand. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, it felt like someone had just rewritten the rules. Ryan had never been one to chase after a woman, not in the way others did. He didn't need to. Women gravitated toward him, drawn by his wealth, power, and the effortless charm he wielded like a weapon. But Lilly Waters was different. She wasn't impressed, wasn't swayed by his presence, and that alone made her all the more intriguing. Yet intrigue was not the only reason he was interested in her. She was an obstacle. Ryan had spent the past year securing the final approvals for his most ambitious project yet, a multi-billion-dollar luxury complex that would redefine the city skyline. Everything was in place, except for one infuriating problem. The Horizon Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting cultural and historical sites, had launched a campaign against his project, arguing that his development would displace dozens of small art communities in the area. They had public support, media coverage, and worst of all, a powerful spokesperson, Lilly Waters. Ryan had never expected an artist to pose such a threat. Yet her words carried weight. She wasn't just some figurehead. She was passionate, relentless, and dangerously persuasive. He needed to neutralize her, and there was no better way to do that than from the inside. He played the long game, moving deliberately. He made sure their paths crossed more frequently, slipping into the same social circles, appearing at charity events he normally wouldn't care for. Always charming, always controlled. He was careful not to push too hard, just enough to spark curiosity, just enough to plant the idea that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the ruthless corporate villain she believed him to be. At first, she kept her guard up, watching him like a predator wary of a trap. "You seem very interested in the arts lately," Lilly remarked one evening, sipping her wine as she eyed him across the dimly lit gallery. Ryan smirked. "Can't a man broaden his interests?" She tilted her head. "A man like you don't do anything unless there's something in it for you." Damn, she was sharp. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to draw her in. "And what if I told you I'm interested in you?" For a fleeting second, something flickered in her eyes, something unreadable. But she recovered quickly, her expression cool and unreadable. "Then I'd say you're wasting your time," she replied smoothly. Ryan only smiled. She was resisting, but he liked it that way. Lilly wasn't just another conquest. She was a puzzle, a challenge. And if there was one thing Ryan Mistry didn't do, it was walk away from a challenge. Ryan had always been in control of his business, of his emotions, of the people around him. He dictated the rules, decided who won and who lost. But with Lilly, things didn't go as planned. At first, she was simply another obstacle, one he intended to remove with charm and manipulation. But the more time he spent around her, the more he found himself genuinely intrigued. She wasn't just strong, she was unyielding. Not in a loud or aggressive way, but in the quiet, effortless way of someone who had already endured the worst and refused to be defined by it. Ryan watched the way she moved, how despite being confined to a wheelchair, she carried herself with the poise of a queen, how she never allowed herself to be pitied, how she could silence an entire room with just a well-placed remark or a knowing look. She didn't just survive her circumstances, she mastered them. One evening, after a charity event, they found themselves alone on a terrace overlooking the city. The air was crisp, the distant hum of traffic filling the silence between them. "You stare a lot," Lilly mused, not looking at him. Ryan smirked, leaning against the railing. "I analyze." "Analyze what?" He hesitated. For once, he didn't have a calculated response. She glanced at him, then, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "Let me guess. You expected someone bitter. Someone broken?" Ryan said nothing, but she let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head. "You think people like me are supposed to give up, don't you?" "I used to." The words left his mouth before he could stop them, and it startled him, this rare moment of honesty. Lilly didn't react with anger or offense. Instead, she simply turned her gaze back to the skyline, her voice softer this time. "Then I guess you've learned something." Something shifted in Ryan that night, a crack in the armor. He had approached her with a purpose, to manipulate her, to use her. But now there were moments when he forgot about the plan entirely. Moments when he caught himself wanting to hear her laugh again, wanting to know what she thought about the world, wanting to understand her, even when he wasn't sure he understood himself. And that was dangerous. Because Ryan Mistry never allowed himself to get attached. And yet here he was. The idea came to him suddenly, bold, reckless, but undeniably effective. Ryan Mistry had spent his life closing impossible deals, bending people to his will with nothing more than confidence and the right leverage. But Lilly Waters was different. She wasn't someone he could buy, wasn't someone easily persuaded by wealth or power. If he wanted to win, he needed to go all in. And so one evening, beneath the soft glow of candlelight in an upscale restaurant, he did the unthinkable. He proposed. It was a calculated move, the ultimate power play. If Lilly became his wife, she would be forced to trust him, forced to reconsider her opposition to his project. He would eliminate his greatest obstacle and secure the most fascinating woman he had ever met, all in one move. Still, as he slid the velvet box across the table and watched her expression shift from surprise to something unreadable, a strange sensation settled in his chest. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure what her answer would be. Lilly stared at the diamond ring, silent for what felt like an eternity. "You're serious," she finally said, her voice quiet but steady. "Completely." She exhaled, glancing away for a moment before meeting his gaze again. You don't love me. It wasn't a question. Ryan didn't flinch. He had expected her skepticism. Not yet, he admitted, leaning forward slightly. But I want to. Lilly let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. That's not how love works, Ryan. No, he agreed, but it's how partnerships do. His words lingered between them, an unspoken challenge. Ryan could see the conflict in her eyes, the weight of her past pressing down on her. She didn't trust him, but she wanted to, and that was enough. After what felt like an eternity, Lilly reached for the ring. Her fingers brushed against the box, hesitation evident in every movement. But then she closed it, sealing her answer with a quiet, decisive click. Okay, she whispered. Ryan hadn't expected a rush of satisfaction, but it was there, settling into his bones like a slow burn. He had won, or at least that's what he thought. The wedding was nothing short of spectacular, an extravagant event designed to impress the city's elite. Lavish floral arrangements, chandeliers dripping with crystal, photographers capturing every perfect moment. On the surface, it was a dream, a power couple uniting in the most glamorous way possible. But beneath the polished smiles and expensive champagne, there was something missing. A distance neither of them acknowledged. Lilly was his wife now, bound to him in ways she probably didn't fully understand. But as Ryan watched her from across the ballroom that night, surrounded by guests yet somehow completely alone, he realized something unsettling. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he had truly won it all. The honeymoon phase never arrived. From the moment Lilly and Ryan exchanged vows, their marriage felt more like a business merger than a love story. The world saw them as the perfect power couple, a billionaire tycoon and a brilliant artist, two individuals of influence, commanding admiration wherever they went. But behind closed doors, the silence was suffocating. Lilly had tried. She had wanted to believe that beneath Ryan's arrogance and cold calculation, there was something genuine. That maybe, just maybe, her presence in his life would force him to change. But illusions never lasted long. It started subtly. Missed dinners, late-night phone calls, urgent business meetings that always seemed more important than time spent with her. Ryan was always working, always negotiating, and when he was home, he was present in body, but never in spirit. Then one evening, she found the documents. She wasn't even looking for them. Just a simple search for something in his office led her to an unlocked drawer, a neatly stacked pile of contracts and legal paperwork related to the Lexington Plaza development. The project. His project. Her breath caught as she scanned the papers. The timeline, the acquisitions, the legal maneuvering. It all pointed to one undeniable truth. He had married her to silence her opposition. Her fingers tightened around the pages, rage and heartbreak warring inside her. She had been nothing but a chess piece, a name, a signature, a symbol to make the public believe Ryan Mistry cared about the art communities his project would erase. The realization was crippling. When he walked her through the door that night, she was waiting. You used me, she said flatly, holding up the contracts. Ryan's expression barely shifted, just a flicker of recognition before his face settled into unreadable calm. You went through my things. You married me for this, Lilly cut in, voice shaking with anger. Tell me I'm wrong. Ryan didn't answer. He didn't deny it, and that silence broke her more than any lie ever could. Her heart pounded in her chest. Was any of it real? She demanded, searching his face for something, anything, that wasn't complete indifference. Ryan exhaled slowly, then leaned against the desk, arms crossed. I did what I had to do. The cold, calculated response made her stomach twist. God, she whispered, more to herself than to him. I was such an idiot. Ryan's jaw tensed, his eyes flickering with something unreadable. But he said nothing. And that was it. That was the moment Lilly stopped trying. She had believed foolishly that she could change him, that the moments of warmth, of quiet connection, had meant something. But to Ryan Mistry, love had always been just another transaction. She refused to be part of it any longer. I'm leaving, she said, voice devoid of emotion. Ryan's posture stiffened slightly. Lilly, no. Her voice was sharp, final. You don't get to explain. You don't get to pretend. I was stupid enough to fall for this, but I'm not staying in a marriage built on lies. She turned, pushing her wheelchair toward the door, refusing to let him see the tears brimming in her eyes. Ryan watched her go, his expression unreadable. He could have stopped her, could have given her something, an apology, a confession, a reason to stay, but he didn't. Because Ryan Mistry had spent his whole life believing that emotions made men weak. And as the door closed behind Lilly, he realized something unsettling. For the first time in his life, he felt completely, utterly alone. The rain poured down in sheets, turning the streets into a blur of water and flashing headlights. Ryan barely noticed. His mind was singularly focused. Lilly was leaving him, and he couldn't accept that. His grip on the steering wheel tightened as he sped down the slick roads, chasing after the black car carrying his wife away from him. His chess piece, his opponent, his only tether to something real. He had let her walk out, had stood there emotionless as she ripped herself away from his life. But now, as the storm raged outside and his own thoughts thundered even louder, he realized the bitter truth. He had made a mistake. Rain lashed against the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, distorted and chaotic. He could barely see past the water and his own frustration. Then, movement from the left. A blur of metal. Bright headlights cutting through the darkness. A truck. Too close. Too fast. The impact was deafening. The Ferrari spun violently, tires screaming against the pavement. The world tilted, then shattered. The sickening crunch of metal folding, glass exploding, the force of it all ripping through his body. Ryan barely had time to register the pain before everything went black. The rhythmic beeping of machines pulled him back. The scent of antiseptic, the distant murmur of hospital staff. It was all wrong. Too quiet, too sterile. His eyelids felt impossibly heavy, but he forced them open, greeted by the stark white ceiling of a hospital room. He wasn't dead, but something was very, very wrong. Then he tried to move. A sharp, cold terror shot through him as he realized. He couldn't feel his legs. His breathing hitched. His fingers gripped the sheets as if grounding himself could undo the horror settling in his chest. The door opened, and a doctor stepped in, her expression careful, professional. "Mr. Mistry," she said gently, "you were in a severe accident. Your spinal cord sustained significant trauma." "I'm afraid," she hesitated, as if trying to soften the inevitable blow. He already knew. Still, he needed to hear it. Needed it confirmed because his mind refused to accept what his body already knew. "You won't be able to walk again," she finally said. A sharp ringing filled his ears, drowning out everything else. Ryan barely registered the rest of her words, the standard explanations, the mentions of rehabilitation, physical therapy. None of it mattered, because the reality was unforgiving, absolute. Ryan Mistry, the man who had built his life on power, dominance, and control, was now the very thing he had always despised. A cripple, a burden, a man trapped in a body that refused to obey him. A strangled sound, half laughter, half disbelief, escaped his throat. The irony was cruel, almost poetic. This was punishment. For the first time in his life, Ryan Mistry felt truly powerless. Ryan had always believed that power was everything, that control defined a man, that the weak, the helpless, were nothing more than burdens dragging the world down. Now he was one of them. Days blurred together in the sterile white of the hospital room. Machines beeped, nurses moved in and out, voices spoke at him rather than to him. But none of it mattered. Nothing mattered anymore. He couldn't move, he couldn't stand, he couldn't even feel his own legs. The rage came in waves, violent, suffocating, desperate. He lashed out at everyone, the doctors, the nurses, the physical therapists who tried to encourage him. He refused their help, refused their sympathy. He didn't need pity. He needed to wake up from this nightmare. One afternoon, a young nurse approached him with forced optimism. Mr. Mistry, I know this is difficult, but if we start your therapy today, get out, he snarled. She hesitated. I just, I said, get out. His voice echoed against the walls, raw and unrestrained. The nurse flinched before quietly leaving, her eyes filled with the same look that everyone gave him now. Pity. He hated it. Hated the way people spoke softer around him now, as if he were fragile. Hated the way they looked at him, as if he were a broken thing. Hated the way he felt. Weak, helpless. It wasn't just his body that had been crushed in that wreck. It was his entire identity. Ryan Mistry wasn't supposed to be this. He was supposed to be unstoppable, untouchable, a force to be reckoned with. Now, he was nothing. One evening, when the hospital was quiet, he forced himself to sit up in bed, his hands gripping the sheets. His arms still worked. His upper body was still strong, but it didn't matter because the legs beneath him were nothing more than dead weight. His breathing grew heavy, his chest tightening as he stared at himself. He looked at the useless limbs that had once carried him through boardrooms, through high-rise penthouses, through powerful negotiations where he commanded the room. Now, he couldn't even stand to face himself in the mirror. The world outside continued to move, but for Ryan, everything had stopped, and he didn't know if he would ever find a way forward again. The first time Lilly rolled back into Ryan's life, he nearly told her to leave. She sat in the doorway of his hospital room, her expression unreadable, eyes scanning him as if she was evaluating a stranger rather than a man she had once called her husband. Ryan didn't know why she had come. Pity? Revenge? A twisted sense of satisfaction in seeing him brought to her level? He didn't want to hear whatever she had to say. Turn around and leave, Lilly, he muttered, his voice hoarse, tired. She didn't move. I'm serious, he snapped. I don't need visitors, and I sure as hell don't need your sympathy. Finally, she rolled forward, stopping beside his bed, her eyes locked onto his, sharp as ever. You think I'm here because I pity you? She asked, her voice calm, steady. Ryan, if I wanted to see you suffer, I wouldn't waste my time coming here. You're doing a fine job of that on your own. Something in her tone cut deeper than any insult. Ryan let out a bitter laugh, looking away. Right, let me guess. You're here to teach me some grand lesson about life in a wheelchair? Because I'm not interested in one of your motivational speeches, Lilly. Good, she said simply, because I'm not here to give you one. Ryan frowned, caught off guard by her bluntness. He had expected her to come with soft reassurances, with the same empty words the doctors and therapists had been feeding him for weeks. But there was no sympathy in her gaze, no gentle encouragement, just cold, hard truth. You need to get over yourself, she continued, voice steady. You're not the first man to lose something, and you won't be the last. The difference is you have a choice. Either you learn how to live again, or you let this destroy you. Ryan clenched his jaw, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Easy for you to say. You've had years to get used to it. Lily's expression darkened. And you think those years were easy? She challenged. You think I didn't spend months hating the world? Hating myself? For a moment, she seemed lost in her own memories. But then, she straightened, her voice firm again. I know exactly what you're feeling, Ryan. The anger, the frustration, the self-loathing. But you don't get to stay in this hole forever. Ryan swallowed hard, his fingers curling into the sheets. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that no one could understand what he was going through. But she did, better than anyone, and that terrified him. He didn't respond, and for once she let the silence sit between them. Then, after a long pause, she exhaled and shook her head. I'm not here to save you, she said quietly. I did that once, and look where it got me. Ryan flinched. Lilly reached for the wheels of her chair and turned away, but not before leaving him with one final cutting remark. When you're ready to stop feeling sorry for yourself, call me. And just like that, she was gone. Ryan stared at the empty doorway long after she had left. For the first time since the accident, the anger didn't feel like enough anymore. Because beneath the rage, beneath the frustration, was something else. Something dangerously close to shame. The first time Ryan tried to move from his hospital bed to the wheelchair on his own, he nearly fell flat on his face. His arms trembled as he pushed himself up, gripping the edge of the mattress for support. His body, once powerful and unyielding, now felt foreign, sluggish, uncooperative. For the first time in his life, he had to fight for something as simple as moving. The humiliation was unbearable. He had been a man who controlled everything: his business, his image, his power. Now he couldn't even control his own body. But the worst part? He finally understood Lilly. All the times he had dismissed people like her, seeing them as burdens, as weak, as less. He hadn't known a damn thing. Now he did, and it made him sick. Ryan gritted his teeth, refusing to let the frustration consume him. His arms burned as he pushed again, shifting his weight forward, fingers gripping the wheelchair beside his bed. He felt himself slipping, his body unbalanced. Then, with one last surge of effort, he made it. He landed in the chair, breathless, hands clutching the armrests, as if he had just climbed a damn mountain. Because to him, it felt like one. For the first time since the accident, something flickered in his chest. Not rage, not hopelessness. Determination. Rehabilitation was hell. Every muscle ached. Every movement was a lesson in patience, something he had never possessed before. The therapist forced him to repeat the same exercises over and over, drilling independence into his body and mind. At first he hated them, hated the constant struggle, the helplessness of relying on others for basic tasks. But then, one day, the hate turned into focus. He pushed harder, stretched further, learned how to transfer from the bed to the chair without help, how to navigate tight spaces, how to control the chair with precision. It was slow, it was maddening. But every small victory chipped away at the man he used to be. The arrogant, untouchable Ryan Mistry was dead, and in his place, a different man was beginning to emerge. One evening after a particularly brutal session, Ryan wheeled himself onto the hospital's outdoor terrace. The city stretched before him, the skyline glittering under the night sky. For years, he had looked at this view from his penthouse, towering above it all. Now he was on the ground, just another man among millions. And for the first time, he understood what it meant to start over. Lilly never expected to find the truth that day. She had stopped by Ryan's penthouse, not as a wife, not as a lover, but as someone who, despite everything, still cared. He had changed. She had seen it. He was no longer the untouchable man who looked down on the world from his glass tower. He was learning, struggling, becoming someone else. And yet, fate was cruel. It started with a simple search. She had been looking for an old sketchbook she had left behind months ago, rifling through a drawer in his study. But instead of charcoal-stained pages, she found a file, a police report. Her stomach clenched. Something about it felt wrong. The date, the location, it was familiar. Too familiar. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the words. And then, she saw his name. Ryan Mistry, suspect in a hit-and-run accident. No formal charges filed. Case settled privately. Lily's breath caught in her throat. No, 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 this had to be a mistake. It had to be someone else. Not Ryan, not him. But the more she read, the clearer it became. The Ferrari, the storm, the night her life had been destroyed. The man who had left her to die in that wreck, who had taken her future, her career, her dreams, was the same man she had loved. The room blurred, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. Her fingers clenched the files so tightly that the edges crumpled beneath her grip. "Ryan," she whispered, barely hearing herself. She had to hear him say it, had to hear him admit it. The confrontation came like a storm. Ryan had just finished a therapy session when she appeared in the doorway of his hospital room. But this time she wasn't there to challenge him, to push him toward recovery. She was there to destroy him. She threw the file onto his lap. "Explain this," she demanded, her voice shaking. Ryan frowned, picking it up. As his eyes flickered across the pages, his face paled. Silence. The kind that suffocates, that presses down like a crushing weight. Finally, he looked up, and Lilly saw it all in his eyes. The guilt, the regret, the truth. You knew, she whispered, taking a shaky step back. You knew this whole time, didn't you? Ryan's lips parted, but no words came out. You ruined my life, her voice cracked, eyes burning with unshed tears. And you never said a word. Ryan swallowed hard. Lilly, I don't. The single word was sharp enough to cut. Don't you dare try to justify this. Don't you dare try to tell me it wasn't your fault. His hands tightened around the wheels of his chair. I didn't know it was you, he admitted, voice raw. Not at first. Not until after we were married. Lilly let out a broken laugh, shaking her head. And you still said nothing? Ryan's chest felt like it was caving in. This was the moment he lost her for good. Lilly, he rasped, desperate now. I swear you left me there. Her voice was no longer just filled with anger. It was pain. Deep, soul-crushing pain. You didn't even stop. You didn't check if I was alive. You just drove away. Ryan had nothing to say, because it was true. And the worst part? No apology would ever be enough. Lilly took a slow step backward. You were the only person I thought truly saw me, Ryan. But now I realize you were always just watching from the wreckage you left behind. Her voice broke on the last word, but she refused to let herself cry. She turned, gripping the wheels of her chair with trembling hands. And before Ryan could stop her, before he could beg, she was gone, leaving Ryan alone in the hospital room, trapped in the wreckage of his own sins. Ryan had lost many things in his life. Deals, opportunities, even his ability to walk. But nothing compared to the moment he lost her. The sound of Lilly's wheelchair rolling out of the hospital room echoed in his mind long after she was gone. He sat there frozen, the crumpled police report still clutched in his hands. She knew. She knew everything. And now there was no undoing it. No damage control. No well-crafted apology that could erase the unforgivable truth. For the first time since the accident, since the moment he had woken up in this broken body, Ryan felt like he deserved this pain. He called her, over and over. No answer. He texted. Nothing. Days passed. He sent people to find her, to tell him where she had gone, if she was safe. But Lilly was gone like she had never existed in his world at all. Ryan had always thought of himself as someone who could fix anything. A problem solver, a strategist. But how the hell did he fix this? One night, drowning in whiskey and regret, he gripped his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. He hit the call button one last time, listening as it rang. And rang. And then, a click. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Then her voice came through. Cold, detached. Ryan, stop calling me. His chest tightened. Lilly, please. Don't. Her voice was sharp, cutting through his desperation like a blade. I don't want to hear your excuses. I don't want your apologies. I just don't want you in my life. Ryan closed his eyes, his throat tightening. He had never begged for anything in his life. But now? Lilly, his voice cracked. I don't know how to live with this. A long silence stretched between them. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer, but not forgiving. Then learn, and then the line went dead. Ryan sat in the darkness, phone still pressed to his ear, the silence suffocating. She was gone, and this time there was no chasing after her, no second chance, nothing but the wreckage of what he had done. Ryan had spent his entire life winning. Now he had nothing. Lilly was gone. His company, his empire, was crumbling. Investors had started pulling out. The media painted him as a cold, heartless businessman, and his once loyal board members were circling like vultures, waiting for the right moment to push him out of his own throne. But none of it mattered. Not the money, not the power, not the reputation he had spent years crafting. Because for the first time, Ryan Mistry understood what it meant to lose everything. Days turned into weeks. He barely left his penthouse, the same walls that once symbolized success now feeling more like a prison. The whiskey bottles piled up, untouched meals left cold on the table. His reflection in the mirror was a stranger. Hollowed out eyes, unshaven jaw, a man stripped of everything that had once made him formidable. The world continued to move forward. But Ryan, he was stuck. Every night the past clawed at him, dragging him back to the accident, to that stormy night when his reckless arrogance had destroyed a woman's life. He had spent years pretending it had never happened, convincing himself that it was just a mistake that could be erased with enough money, enough distance, enough time. But there was no escaping it now. Lilly's voice haunted him, the pain in her eyes when she had looked at him, when she had realized the truth. It was unbearable, and yet she had survived. She had lost everything, and still, she had built herself back up. But Ryan was drowning in the wreckage of his own sins, and for the first time in his life, he didn't know how to fix it. One night he wheeled himself out onto his penthouse balcony. The city stretched before him, glittering and alive, completely unaffected by his suffering. For years he had ruled the skyline. Now it mocked him. A bitter laugh escaped his lips as he stared down at the streets below. Was this what it felt like to be powerless? Was this what Lilly had felt when she had woken up in a hospital bed all those years ago? The thought hit him like a punch to the gut. He had done this to her. And now he was exactly where she had been. Broken, lost, and desperately searching for something to hold on to. But unlike her, he had no idea how to start over. Ryan had spent weeks drowning in guilt, trapped in a prison of his own making. But one morning, as he stared blankly at the city from his penthouse, something shifted. He couldn't change the past, but he could choose what came next. For the first time in his life, he wanted to do something that wasn't for himself. It started small. A quiet phone call to his legal team, instructing them to donate a significant portion of his personal fortune to rehabilitation centers. Then another call to his foundation, redirecting funds toward disability programs, accessibility improvements, and medical research. At first it was just money, because money had always been his way of fixing things. But it wasn't enough. So he did something he never would have done before. He showed up. The first time Ryan rolled into a physical therapy center, he felt like a fraud. He wasn't here as the billionaire mogul, not as the untouchable man he used to be. He was just another broken body in a wheelchair. And for the first time, he understood what it meant to belong to this world. The patients, men and women who had lost their limbs, their mobility, their independence, looked at him with familiarity, not pity. They had been where he was. They knew the anger, the frustration, the way the world suddenly saw them as less. But unlike him, they had chosen to fight. And for the first time in his life, Ryan Mistry wanted to fight too. He immersed himself in the work. He met with disability advocates, listening to stories he had once dismissed. He learned about accessibility, about the challenges people like Lilly had faced long before she lost her legs. He sat with veterans, with accident survivors, with people who had been abandoned by society because they no longer fit the mold of what was considered valuable. And the more he listened, the more he saw himself in them. For the first time, his wealth, his power, none of it mattered. What mattered was what he did next. Months passed, and his name became attached to something new. Not ruthless takeovers, not billion-dollar real estate deals, but change. The Mistry Foundation for Rehabilitation in the Arts was launched, providing free therapy, training, and grants for disabled individuals pursuing careers in business, sports, and the arts. A former rival company, once waiting for his downfall, was shocked when Ryan offered to collaborate on accessible infrastructure projects instead of fighting for control. The city he had once dominated now bore his mark in a different way. Not through towering skyscrapers, but through the ramps built into sidewalks, the community centers that provided resources for people who had once been overlooked. Ryan wasn't trying to be a savior. He wasn't trying to erase his sins. But for the first time in his life, he was building something that actually mattered. And somehow that felt like the only thing worth doing anymore. Lilly had promised herself she was done with Ryan Mistry. She had spent months avoiding his name, his existence, everything about him. She had buried the memories, tried to forget the man who had once made her believe in something, only to rip it all away. But then the headlines came. Ryan Mistry launches largest rehabilitation program in the city. Mistry Foundation to fund accessible housing projects. Former billionaire tycoon reinvents himself as a disability advocate. Lilly didn't want to care. She didn't. But the more she read, the harder it became to ignore. This wasn't just a PR stunt. This wasn't the Ryan she had known. And that was why, one quiet afternoon, she found herself rolling into the doors of the Mistry Foundation Rehabilitation and Arts Center. A place that, ironically, bore her influence. Because for all his faults, Ryan had paid attention. The gallery in the front was lined with works by disabled artists. The dance studio had a specially designed floor for wheelchair performances. The gym was outfitted with equipment specifically for paraplegics, stroke survivors, amputees, people like her. And in the middle of it all was him. Ryan was in the main therapy room when she saw him again. He sat in his wheelchair, his sleeves rolled up, assisting a young man with limited mobility as he adjusted to using prosthetic legs. His face was different now, not softer, not weaker, but lighter. He was talking, laughing, not as the ruthless businessman she had once known, but as a man who had learned to live with his own brokenness. Something inside her clenched. When their eyes met across the room, everything stilled. A flicker of surprise crossed Ryan's face, followed by something deeper. Not guilt, not regret, just quiet recognition. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then finally, Ryan wheeled toward her, stopping just close enough that she could feel the weight of everything unsaid between them. "Lilly," he said, his voice low, careful. She studied him, this new version of him, and exhaled softly. "So," she murmured, glancing around, "this is what you've been doing." Ryan nodded. "It's not enough." Lilly met his gaze. "But it's something." A beat of silence passed. No apologies, no pleas for forgiveness. Just two people standing on equal ground for the first time, and somehow that was enough. For now. They sat in the quiet corner of the center's art gallery, away from the noise, away from the eyes that lingered in curiosity. The air between them was heavy, not with anger, not with regret, but with something unspoken. For the first time in years, they were just Ryan and Lilly again. She traced the rim of her coffee cup absent-mindedly before glancing at him. "I never thought I'd see you in a place like this." Ryan smirked, though there was no arrogance behind it, only a quiet self-awareness. "Neither did I." He exhaled, shaking his head. "You probably think it's funny. The man who once thought people like us were useless, running a center for rehabilitation." Lilly arched a brow. "I don't think it's funny. I think it's ironic." Ryan huffed out a soft laugh, leaning back. "Yeah, it is." She studied him for a moment, the way he carried himself now, the way he no longer filled the space with his presence as if he owned it. The Ryan she had once known had been larger than life, always in control, always a step ahead. But this man, he had fallen, and yet here he was, still standing, in his own way. "Do you remember the first time we met?" she asked, a small, distant smile playing on her lips. Ryan's eyes softened. "At the gallery." "You were so damn smug." He let out a chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. "I thought I was charming. You thought you were irresistible." Ryan tilted his head. "And yet, here we are. So, technically, I wasn't wrong." Lilly rolled her eyes, but there was no real irritation behind it. "You were wrong about a lot of things." Ryan nodded, looking down at his hands. "Yeah," he admitted quietly. "I was." The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with memories, some painful, some beautiful. "You know," Lilly murmured after a while, "for a long time, I thought I hated you." Ryan flinched, but he didn't interrupt. "I told myself that you were a monster, that everything you did was calculated, cruel, that you never cared about me, that you never could." Ryan swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "And now?" Lily's fingers curled around the armrest of her wheelchair. "Now I see you differently." Ryan lifted his gaze, searching hers for something. Anything. I see a man who has changed, she said softly. A man who has lost. A man who's still learning how to live with his mistakes. A long pause. Ryan exhaled. And is that enough? Lily's lips pressed together in thought. Then slowly she shook her head. No, but it's a start. Ryan didn't argue, because for the first time in his life he understood that redemption wasn't something given. It was something earned. And maybe, just maybe, he still had a chance to earn it. The days that followed were filled with something neither of them had expected: ease. For the first time in years, Lilly and Ryan weren't at war. There were no battles of pride, no walls of bitterness between them. They had fought, they had broken each other, and now they were simply two people learning how to exist in the same space again. It started with small conversations. Ryan would find himself in the art studio, watching Lilly teach a class of aspiring disabled artists. She would catch glimpses of him at the therapy center, working with patients, helping in ways she never thought he would. They didn't force anything, didn't rush. Instead, they settled into something new, something neither of them had a name for yet. One afternoon, as they sat outside the center, sharing a rare quiet moment, Lilly finally broke the silence. I don't hate you anymore, she admitted, surprising even herself. Ryan turned his head slightly, studying her profile. That's an improvement, he said lightly. She smirked. Don't get too comfortable. A beat of silence passed, then, I still don't know if I can forgive you completely, she continued, her voice softer now. But I don't want to carry this anger forever. Ryan nodded, his fingers tapping absently against the armrest of his wheelchair. I don't expect you to. Lilly glanced at him. You've changed, Ryan, but I need time to figure out what that means. His lips pressed together, but there was no flash of frustration, no demand for something she wasn't ready to give. Not this time. Instead, he simply said, take all the time you need, and for the first time he meant it. They didn't fall back into old habits. Ryan didn't try to win her over with charm and manipulation. Lilly didn't push him away out of anger or fear. Instead, they started again. As equals. As something fragile but real. A foundation built not on power, not on deception, but on truth. The night was quiet, the world softened by the glow of city lights streaming through the windows of the empty dance studio. The space was still, untouched, except for the two figures in the center, two people who had been shattered and rebuilt in ways neither of them had ever expected. Lilly sat in her wheelchair, her fingers resting lightly on the wheels, her gaze thoughtful as she watched Ryan across from her. You know, she mused, tilting her head, the first time we met, I thought you were the worst kind of man. Ryan let out a quiet chuckle, leaning slightly forward. I was, she smirked. And now? His expression softened, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Now, I'm trying not to be. Lilly studied him, then slowly extended her hand. Dance with me. Ryan blinked, surprised, before glancing down at his chair. Lilly, No excuses, she interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. Just follow my lead. A slow smile tugged at the corner of Ryan's lips. Of course, she would say that. She moved first, pushing her chair back slightly, tilting her body in a way that was both graceful and deliberate. Ryan hesitated for only a moment before mirroring her movements. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but it was theirs. The room was silent except for the soft whir of wheels gliding over polished wood, the faint rustle of clothing as they turned, spun, found a rhythm. It was unlike anything Ryan had ever done before, not a power move, not a display of control, but something weightless, something freeing. For the first time he wasn't leading, and for the first time he didn't need to. Lilly moved and he followed. Then he moved and she followed. Two figures, two shadows intertwined, not as victims, not as broken pieces of a past they couldn't change, but as something else, something whole. There were no words, no apologies, no promises of a future they weren't sure they could have. Just the quiet understanding of two souls who had finally found their way back to each other. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the quiet city as Lilly and Ryan sat side by side on the rooftop terrace of the rehabilitation center. The air was crisp, carrying the distant hum of life beginning to stir below them. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. For so long, their story had been about collision, about power, betrayal, pain. But now, sitting here in the quiet aftermath, it was something else entirely. Not a perfect ending. Not a love story neatly wrapped in a bow, but a beginning. Ryan exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping against the metal of his wheelchair. You ever wonder what would have happened if that night never happened? His voice was quiet, contemplative. Lilly turned her head slightly, looking at him. If you never hit my car? He nodded. She considered it for a moment. Maybe I would have been on Broadway. A small, wistful smile played on her lips. Maybe you'd still be the same arrogant billionaire, stepping on people just to climb higher. Ryan chuckled under his breath. That sounds about right. A beat of silence passed. Do you regret it? He asked, his voice softer this time. Lilly looked down at her hands, fingers tracing the edge of her sleeve. I used to, she admitted. For a long time, I thought that night ruined me. She glanced back at him. And you? Ryan didn't answer immediately. He looked at the horizon, watching as the first rays of sunlight stretched across the sky. I regret hurting you, he finally said. I regret the man I was. Lilly nodded, accepting his words for what they were. Not an excuse, not an attempt to rewrite the past, just the simple, undeniable truth. She reached for her wheels, shifting slightly. I don't think we can ever go back to what we were, Ryan. His jaw tensed, but he nodded. He already knew that. But, she continued, turning to him again, really looking at him. Maybe we don't have to. Ryan met her gaze, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel the need to control what happened next. Maybe they would find their way back to each other in a different way. Maybe they wouldn't. But for now, they had this moment, this fragile, imperfect piece, and that was enough. For now.